Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the Nikhil Hogan Show. And returning to the program, we said it on the last Kotumachi interview. We said, you mentioned, Professor Ventura, that the Durante edition was coming out, and now it's out. And so we're so excited to have you back to talk about Francesco Durante. Professor Peter Ventura, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much.
Okay, yes. So go ahead.
No, it was just a few months ago I finished the Kotomachi edition, and I've been working on Durante for many years, so it was just a coincidence that these came so near each other. But anyway, I'm happy that this has been done now.
Oh, that's really, and it's interesting you said that Durante is problematic because of the sheer number of sources, over 50 sources, you were saying. And you said something like, in my whole lifetime, it would take you longer than your lifetime to put something together. But you have an edition, and I think a lot of people were very excited when you released it. Why don't you talk about this edition? How did you make it, and what were the primary sources that you decided to use?
Yeah, so the first thing I started this work maybe 15 years ago or something like that.
15.
And the first thing was to collect the sources. So some sources, among colleagues, we share some pictures. So quite a lot I received great help from generous and kind colleagues. But there were also quite a few sources that I could not find in that way, and I had to travel. So I've been traveling around quite a bit and collecting them one by one. And when I thought I was finished with that, another one popped up and another one popped up. So when I started, there were 23. And when I was at the end of my dissertation, there were about 50. And now I think we're up to 52 or 53 or something like that.
Right.
So it has more than doubled in the period of some 15 years.
Now, are some sources just much more important than others? Are they all equally weighted? I mean, are there some really principal sources that are key to the whole thing?
Yeah, that's the big problem when you collect like 50 sources and you see all these. I mean, it's so much material, and how should one be able to see what is what does really belong to Durante and what may belong to other composers, and how certain can we be that things are by Durante really or not? How old are these sources? Which sources may be copies of other sources? That may very well be the case. And are there families of sources? Are they related in some kind? Another question has been: is it possible to see that certain sources are from a certain period of Durante's teaching, while other sources may be from another period of teaching, and may be the case that he developed these sources over time, that they changed?
Well, how long was he a teacher? Like, how many years did he teach?
I mean, he must have been teaching already from the very beginning of the 18th century. 1710, 1711, I think, is the first traces of his teaching in Naples. And he was teaching until his death in 1755, so almost 50 years, I would say.
Wow.
So it's a huge time span, and he was very active as a teacher. He was teaching in a lot at the Onofrio and Loreto, but he was also teaching at Poveri in the early parts of his life. So he was, and he had a lot of famous students. I mean, he's the one that has the most famous students with Piccini, Sacchini, Pergolesi, Cimarosa for a very short time. Maybe Paisiello had a few lessons with him very, very early on before Durante died. It was about the same year when Paisiello started to study and when Durante died. So must have been a very short time.
Now he's about the same age as Johann Sebastian Bach, right? So he's around there, 1984, 1985. Was he was he was he what was his relationship with Alessandro Scarlatti? Are they like contemporaries of that period? I know Scarlatti must be older, of course, but
Yeah.
did they cross paths? And was he ever a student of Scarlatti? Did he go to Rome and study for a little bit?
Yeah. So Durante was born in 1684,
Mm.
and it is assumed that he studied in Rome in the first decade of the 18th century, and particularly with Pittoni, who was the great expert of Palestrina. And there is at least one mass in the Santini collection, which appears to be an autograph from, I think, 1709. And this, it's an astonishing piece of music. I've transcribed it myself just to get to know the music, and you get the feeling when you hear like the Actus Tragicus by Bach. Very competent composer at a very young age. Quite astonishing. That's the feeling I get when I read this Mass by Durante. Gosh, what is this?
Well, didn't Bach copy a mass by Durante?
Yeah, no, he did not copy it, but
Like, or at least made a transcription or something like that?
he adapted a Mass. So he had a Mass by Durante on his desk, and probably he had an opinion about this Mass because he turned the Gloria into a Kyrie and the Kyrie into a Gloria. So he must have thought that that material would have been better for a Kyrie, and that would have been better for, I don't know. But anyway, both these works are very, very good.
Great. So now you said there were various sources, and maybe we can just spend a little bit of time to just maybe go into detail about that. So
Yeah,
maybe the
so
next slide is there's a
we,
regule.
I took one picture of all the types of manuscripts there are. So there is a type of manuscript that just describe the rules, the regole. And usually you can see in those manuscripts that they are given numbers. Regola prima is here on the first page, and they usually go up to, I think, 15 or something like that, with small exercises after each rule. And these kind of manuscripts have small lines of text, small explanations, and that's quite unusual in the other ones. So the second type of manuscripts is more like it starts with the rules, but very soon you get a succession of pieces in which these rules are applied. Yeah? So there's a combination of regole and what we today would call partimenti numerati, so figured-based
Okay.
exercises. And interesting to see in these exercises that all these Partimenti, you can really see from the Partimenti that they are made of the exercises that are earlier on in these manuscripts. And you can see this here on this page, camminare di nona, so how to treat the ninth. And it's just a little hint about the particular rule that is being applied, that he's working with, right?
Great.
Then the next type is it usually has this title, Studie per cembalo. Sometimes the title is longer, and then it says Studie per cembalo con partimenti diversi. And in this type of manuscripts, we usually find some 40 to 50 what we would call today partimenti diminuiti. Yeah, so these are partimenti with some hints for how you could elaborate them. And this is what I think the advanced course of the Durante's Partimenti. And they're clearly more advanced than the Regole and the earlier pieces.
Advanced by, you mean, are they fugues?
No, they are not fugues. They are mostly unfigured or largely unfigured partimenti.
So are they comparable to Fenaroli's book 4, or I guess with Professor
exactly.
Demera's book 3, and so it's more Moti del Basso and that sort of thing?
Exactly. So you see in Fenaroli the structure of Durante's pedagogy. So you start with the rules, then you go over to doing pieces, applying these rules, and then when you're ready, it is as if you sweep everything from the table and start all over again with partimenti, but now without figures. Yeah? So the unfigured bases come later on as a kind of advanced course in Partimento. And then there is a last type of manuscripts, and these manuscripts are usually from the 19th century. Actually, until recently, I did not know of any source from the 18th century. But most recently, we found one that is probably from the 1770s. So that's probably the origin of this type of manuscript. And typical for this type of manuscript is that you have the rules, you have the partimenti numerati, you have the partimenti diminuiti, and then there is a section of fugues. And when I analyzed all these materials when I made my database, I found out that many of these fugues are actually not by Durante. There are a few by Leo. There is one by Mancini. I don't remember all the details, but anyway, it's quite clear that this whole set of fugues is like an attachment of older type fugues that people valued and put at the end of Durante's, simply because there are no early sources of these fugues with clear attributions to Durante. There is not even one piece is clearly by Durante.
Did he just not write many fugues? Is that just how it was?
He did write fugues, but I think it was part of his pedagogical strategies to downplay the fugue because it was very time consuming to do fugue. I think he was aware that in the succession of what he would be doing after the Partimento teaching, he would be teaching a kind of counterpoint that was not relying on double counterpoint. So he decided early on that what is important for my students is to learn melody really, really well, and to become flexible in modulating. So modulation technique is very important, flexibility, dramaturgy in making arias and so on, to become prepared for the opera. So all the skills that were important for opera composition were in this kind of pedagogical curriculum.
But he never wrote
Um,
any operas, right? I mean, he was a church composer. It's so interesting, right? What that's like. I've wondered why he's produced so many talented operatic
yeah,
composers, and yet, his own oeuvre, you could say, is mainly church music, or is it completely? I don't know. Is it mainly church music and instrumental works?
lots of instrumental music too, but that's true. He was mainly a church music composer, but his entire pedagogy is directed towards opera, and you see
Hmm.
that from his students. I mean, all the great opera composers in Naples in the 18th century were from the Durante lineage, not from
Hmm.
the Leo lineage.
And Leo wrote a ton of operas, right? That's so
Yeah.
interesting. And he was yet more conservative in his more fugues and more like invertible counterpoint in his Partimento, and that's very
Yes.
interesting. Yeah.
Of
Okay,
course,
so
there was a milieu around these composers. I mean, they were working in religious institutions, right? So there were expectations also from these institutions what they should teach.
mm,
And the Turchini, where Leo was teaching at the end of his life, and where also the students of Leo continued to teach in the way that Leo had been teaching, they were clearly focused on taking the market of church music composition in Naples,
mm,
while the other two took the market for opera. It, it's kind of a bit of branding,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
What what do you want to become known for as an institution? Yeah, so here I just wrote down some of the manuscripts that belong to these various types. These abbreviations are like the letter for
Mm,
the country, and then the library, and then the call number
mm.
in the libraries.
Are these hard to
Um,
get? Are these like precious, like Picasso's? Are they are they like you have to get permission and you have to find them and that sort of thing?
of course,
Yeah, they're
yes.
they're like
Some some of
relics.
some of these places took a long long while to get the photos, but
Yeah,
if you're patient,
yeah.
it works.
So here's type 3 and type 4. I notice a lot of type 4.
Yeah, and the type 4 are all 19th century sources, the ones that you see here.
Okay. So
Yeah.
what is
So
this?
and then we have this one that turned up. I mean, I saw this in a catalog, just the number uh, of the manuscript, and in the catalog it stood anonimo, and then partimenti, no, cadenze e partimenti. So I mean, it could be anything. I had no clue what it was, and I asked a friend of mine, Sean Curtis, to see if he could make photos of it. And as soon as I received them, I saw, aha, this is another one of the type 4, but earlier than all the other ones. So
Right.
this became the finally the source that I used for my edition. And the reason for picking this source as my principal source is that it has this broad overview. So you get all the regole, the numerati, the diminuiti, and all these fugues, although they are not by Durante. So in the second volume, I have a section of opera spuria, so spurious works, and I also show the attributions that I have found in other sources to other composers. So you can see who the composers are who really made these fugues.
So I think, did you transcribe these? Let's go to the next slide here.
Yeah, so just one picture of the start of the A series, so the Regole series. It starts with the preparations of the fourth. And so in the beginning it says prima formazione della quarta, la quale nasce dall'ottava. So you get the preparation of the fourth. If I make it two part, then you hear it arises from the octave. Then the fourth becomes apparent due to the rising fifth in the bass, and then you get the resolution. So it's really the basis of almost any cadence. Now, what I didn't understand in the beginning, I could not really understand why Durante wrote these exercises like 7 times with the same figures. There was no variation in them. And it was thanks to the counterpoint notebooks that I started to understand what they did with them. Because every time he wrote a new cadence in the bass, he would play a variation. Now you can't see that in the actual Partimento method, but it was like implied that the teacher would play the variations and the students would learn these variations as patterns that they could exchange, because all these exercises are of the same length. And it really starts to work as any jazz musician would work with 2-5-1 progressions. And you really can see that this is improvisational, an improvisational method to learn music.
Now, was it always a three-voiced realization, like yeah, just not like chords? He wanted like a fluid counterpoint style, not necessarily just a bunch of chords like you'd see in the Paris Conservatory.
Yeah. Yeah, I think both 2-part and 3-part. The reason why I don't think 4-part harmony was so much involved is that these were things. I mean, we know what they received on the note stand, so this is the stuff that they saw. So the rest went through the ears. So you can understand that if you would play like 4-part or 3 parts over these basses, it becomes very difficult to hear the difference between the alto and the tenor. So it's more reasonable to assume that the 3-part style was actually the more frequently used style for these exercises. And this is also confirmed in many examples in these Partimento notebooks. You get examples of real contrapuntal realizations in 3-part style. Often 1 part starts with a rest, just to make it audible for the student to imitate. It makes complete sense to me that this was done by ear.
So if you're a teacher, you would want to load up on tons of examples, right? And so you would basically internalize them, share them with your students, and start this way simply with lots of examples. Where do you get the examples from?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer to this question is Corelli.
I was just thinking about it, but I was just thinking about Corelli in my head as we're talking about 3 voices.
Absolutely. So Corelli's trio sonatas were used a lot. I mean, they were the most widely printed pieces. It's a style that was like a model style for many composers, and many composers composed their Opus 1 as a kind of homage to Corelli. I mean, if you look at many Italian composers in the late 17th century, early 18th century, you find Opus 1 trio sonatas. That's how they learned. I mean, that was the goal of for many composers. Maybe not in Naples, because in Naples there were many other things going on. So they had to write like church music, Dixit Dominus, and the Mass, and the solo motet, and so on. But definitely in the rest of Italy, it was a lot of trio sonata composition in the beginning of their careers.
I'm going to ask a question about Corelli. I was actually reading his biography, and people all knew his works. They would debate it. They would talk about the merits. It was so widespread around Italy. So my question about the trio sonatas is, as a teacher, would you just say like, um, how would you draw from them? Would you take, would you transcribe them for a keyboard, or how would Durante have used them, especially for Partimento? Would he have say, let's look at the trio sonata now? Now, obviously, there's some problems like voices cross. Sometimes there's lots of 16th notes. It's not always playable, but like I'm sure you can get a lot of things. What's your, as a teacher, from a teacher's perspective, to use the Corelli trio sonatas?
Yeah, well, what I say to my student is just to enjoy um, listening to the trio sonatas and get to know them, and get to love them. I mean, that's I think the most important thing. And if you have a score of the trio sonatas, especially the slow movements in the beginning, are often maybe 10, 12, 14 bars only. Um, Great pieces to study. I mean, on a quite moderate level, it's not so very difficult to understand what's going on in these small introductions. So it's perfect material to start with. Beautiful imitations, and yeah, you see the this one in C major is a perfect example. I think this is the start of the Opus 3, isn't it?
I think Opus 4. Opus
Okay.
4, yeah.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is
And,
like, this is good for keyboardists as well, right? Because it's like you
yeah.
see a Motti del Basso.
Yeah. If you just see the bass here, I mean, it's almost a Partimento.
Yeah, exactly.
So you, and actually in some of these Partimento manuscripts, there are pieces by Corelli among the Partimenti. So you find this material in the Partimento books.
So you said that they were actually used in, were they used in Naples as pedagogical? Do we have evidence that oh, Corelli, or is it just a general sentiment? He's just so well known, everyone knows and you can see it in works. It's like you were saying, people's opus ones were trio sonatas.
Yeah. So I don't know about Durante specifically if he used Corelli, um, but I mean it's definitely in the air.
Yeah.
I mean Gasparini was a very important figure as a
Oh, he
model.
wrote the treatise, right? The treatise
Yes,
on
yes.
practical. Yeah, yeah.
Gasparini, Scarlatti, of course, and Corelli were the three big names in the early 18th century.
Okay.
So, I mean, it would be very, very, very weird to think that they did not study this music. I don't think that's very likely. It was all over the place.
Okay, so what is this? What is this Partimento?
Yeah, so this is the start of the B series. So this is the very start of the numerati. And you see the pieces become a little bit larger, bigger, but there's still always an idea, a pedagogical idea. So in this case, you can see if you look carefully that in the first line you see 7/6 7/6 7/6. Yeah, so that's the basic idea of the piece, and that is used in the rest of the piece too.
Yeah,
And so it's almost like there is still a rule going on. There's still about a rule, but now you get a little more of a an artwork, and it's more elaborated, and you have to do more things with your ear, and there are modulations going on. So it's a little bit
You
more challenging than the stuff you did in the beginning.
you said that his Partimenti are more artistic and more musically of a higher quality than perhaps Fenaroli, who you said was perhaps more pedagogical, and these were more you could say more inspired. You'd say,
It's my personal opinion.
yeah.
When I play Durante, I I get the same like a quality feeling that I get when I play Hyde. There is so much surprise in this music. There is so much intricate small things. You think that he goes to a certain key, and he does exactly the opposite, very very swiftly. I mean, many beautiful things going on in his music, and also in his pedagogical work. So you might say, yeah, but this is pedagogical stuff. Is there anything of value here? But it's really good. It's really good. So I would say it's among the best stuff around in Naples,
Wow.
together with Leo's material. Leo's
Mhm.
Partimenti are also top quality.
You did the books, the two, 3 volumes of Nicola Sala. How does Sala compare with Leo and Durante in terms of the quality of the Partimento?
Yeah. So um, Sala is more complicated.
Really?
The yeah the level is very high. So he made his Partimenti very early on in his life. Sigismondo tells us that he studied the bases of his teacher Fago, Nicola Fago,
Mm,
and Fago's bases were difficult. So he studied a lot and turned his knowledge about Partimento and counterpoint into these exercises. And this was in the beginning of the 18th century, when the level was still very very high.
mm,
And then when he started teaching after the 1750s, the level went down. The quality of the students wasn't as good anymore, and there was probably less money in these institutions,
mm.
and and he couldn't use them anymore. So at the end of his life, it is told that he used actually Leo's pieces because they were slightly easier to start
Really?
with. Yeah.
Wow.
So he almost gave up about his Partimenti. Nobody could play them. It's too difficult.
Well, people can check out your edition. They're all there. Okay, so diminuiti is this?
Yeah, so this is a typical example of the diminuiti. Very few figures, only in the cadence to mark new key coming, but otherwise largely unfigured. And then there are three um, ways to make an elaboration of the central interval that is at stake here. So this
7-1.
particular Partimento is about the semitone.
Mm.
And then you have to do something on this semitone. So what are you going to do with the other hand? So Durante gives three solutions, and then you work with these ideas and make something out of it.
Yeah, so
Yeah, so
how do you check that you're doing so these examples, you plug them in, they work. You said something like people would make the students when they did a Partimento, they would do many different variations or like versions. And so if you're a teacher, you're a student, you put in these three. How do you make 20, 30 different variations?
no, I think one idea is applied in the whole piece.
Okay.
In similar ways, or maybe with slight variations, but you stick to the idea, so it becomes a unity. And then you get the next idea, and then you make scalar movements, and that affects what you do maybe also in the left hand, and so you make something out of that. And then besides these three, maybe you might be encouraged to do a number 4 and a number 5. You're on your own.
Great, great. So
Yeah.
do you ever look at the Durante solfeggi for melodic ideas and how they connect with the Partimento and the counterpoint books?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There is a kind of a paradox, because if you look at the solfeggi by Durante, they are quite old-fashioned. They are more like church music style, while the Partimenti are clearly more modern. So, and in the school of Leo, it's almost the other way around. The Partimento stuff and the counterpoint teaching is very old-fashioned. That was clearly connected, and the solfeggi were clearly used as models for opera. So the modern style was more in the solfeggi. So to me, it looks very much like as if the solfeggio was a complement to counterpoint pedagogy in general.
Yeah.
And so if Durante School does modern counterpoint and a more dramatic approach to contrapuntal teaching, then he would compensate for that by giving old-fashioned stuff in the singing lessons. Yeah. So in other words, I think the solfeggio are more used as like materials for the church music composition, while what you do in Partimento is more like becoming very skilled in playing and get a fluent composition in aria and recitative composition.
Would it be so? Maybe if you wanted to be a church musician, you take Durante's solfeggio, you take Leo's Partimenti, and then you put the two together.
Yeah, I think there are a few schools that really combine these aspects. You know, the school of Feo is a little bit in the middle. So Feo was also a student of Fago, so he has this old-fashioned counterpoint, but he has also a dramatic attitude, and so there are more composers that are really a little bit more in the middle. Yeah, and
So,
this is the first one of the fugues, and this one is definitely
and
by Leo.
oh, by Leo, not by
Yeah,
Durante.
no, this is
Okay,
by Leo. Yeah,
okay. And you included it into
yeah,
the edition?
simply because it's always there in the Durante set in the 19th century, and also in this particular source that we found in from the 1770s. So it has been part of the Durante teaching tradition. Although we must be careful to acknowledge that this is not by Durante but by Leo.
I'm going to ask a question that might seem uh, dumb, but would Leo or Durante ever share teaching materials? I mean, they crossed paths, right, as teachers?
Yes, I don't know, but at least one thing I've noticed in Sala's teaching. I mean, Sala was a student of Leo and a student of Fago, and he was the successor of Leo, and he used Durante's canons in his teaching in the 1750s. So he I mean, that was then maybe the more severe part of contrapuntal teaching. But anyway, he he probably learned from Durante, so there was no like
Right.
concrete wall between these institutions. Of course, I mean they knew each other and so on. But the pedagogy is clearly different. That's very clear.
These okay, so let's keep moving. Now the use of moti del basso.
Yeah. So I just wanted to show a few examples or a few themes in the next slide. And I put the numbers of the, in my edition of the second volume. So the pieces C29, C32, 33, 34, etc. If you just look at the themes, then you can actually recognize the moti del basso. And the next one. And then this. And then up a fourth and down a third. Etc., etc. So you see that this is part of the ascending series of moti del basso. So there is what I want to say is there is an underlying structure, a pedagogical structure in the diminuiti, where you see that the first part of the C series is based on the ascending series of bass motions, and the second half of this C series is based on the descending series of bass motions.
Oh, okay. And it's a progression.
It's a progression, yeah, and this is what you also recognize from Fenaroli, because Fenaroli, he also he works with like dry exercises of this moti del basso, and then he does something with them.
Yeah.
It seems the same idea. We don't know what if Durante also did dry exercises, simply doing the bass motions without making a piece out of it. So this is probably only part of what is left, and maybe many things were done that were never notated.
The diminuiti have a couple of a couple of examples. In Fenaroli's rules, I think there's some examples in the manuscripts where he actually gives some upper or some right hand figurations and what to do. And is there anything else? Does he in the other manuscripts? Does he put any, like when he's discussing regulae? Does he have examples for the regulae? Or sometimes it's just text, right? People just write text. They put a baseline with figures, but they don't actually put the right hand part.
No. You can find that in some of Durante's students may have like examples.
Okay.
Like Giuseppe Doll does that, and Nicola Calandro, who was a student of Feo. So you can find some of these more cadence-like examples, but otherwise it's more like you only get the pieces, and then you have to do the work yourself.
Wow. Okay. So now you put here the Gallipoli manuscript. So that's a
Yes.
student, right, of Durante?
Yeah. So here we have, you see, actually, this is a diminuiti by Durante in the bass. This is actually the one that I just played.
Oh, yeah.
And then the student has figured something out and notated it for himself. And we're very lucky to have 46 of them in this manuscript. So
those
these
are
are
authentic from a student who's probably working with Durante. And you said something interesting, right? It was maybe not at the level of like the Parma manuscript, but it's a pretty competent student. He does make some mistakes, right?
Yeah. So absolutely I'm not sure whether Durante was ever involved in this. I'm not sure at all. It could be a student maybe 10 years after Durante's death who did this on his own. Very well possible. So I wouldn't say that this is like the authoritative way to do diminuiti, not at all.
But you can get
Because
a
there's,
lot of good stuff from it.
yeah, but the one thing which is very interesting, what also could be interesting for the viewers, is that there are a few pieces in this manuscript that are remodeled, recomposed pieces. You can still recognize from which piece they come, but not really.
Could you give an example?
Yeah, so from the context, you can see, this must be this diminuiti that he has like changed so much that you would not recognize it if you didn't know that it was coming
Mhm.
from the diminuiti.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's reworked
Oh, I have a
composition.
question. I have a question about the diminuiti then. So, is there like you said 50 sources? How many of them are like diminuiti, and how many of those is it like one person who is there like one manuscript that people copied a bunch of times, or every unique sources with unique collections it's all different, or is there tremendous similarity among the like the diminuiti sources, for instance?
Um, yeah, there are quite a few differences. Some of the pieces are longer than in other manuscripts, so there you can find like cuts, pieces of one diminuiti that has disappeared, and you don't find it in later sources at all anywhere else. But in the oldest sources, you may still find um, a more complete version.
Right.
And I particularly I have used in my edition, I have made use of the Genova source, which is the oldest one. I think it is from the 1730s or 40s. So that's a very valuable source for the diminuiti. And I could actually correct many small details in the text, because my principal source is a copy of a copy of a copy.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I could go back to a very early one and see, this is what it should be.
Right. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Right, right. That's wonderful. Okay, so we are coming to the end of the slideshow.
Yes.
So the musical treasures of the Gallipoli. So we just talked about that, and that's of
Yeah.
course Westman's so many great publications, the Martini, the Mate. Oh my goodness, these are all like must buys if you're interested in Partimento. And here it is, the after 15 years, 15 years publication for the Regole and the Partimenti. So now, how would you envision teachers using this? Like, where how do you, because you've published Martini, you've published Mate, um, Cotumaci. There's also Fenaroli, and there's so how would you like teachers to use these materials in a with their students? What's an efficient way, a good way of a productive way, a beneficial way that you envision teachers to use these materials?
Yeah, I think three-part style and developing variations on the cadences, and to make recordings of them, and to get your students to work both with their hands on the keyboard when they play, but also doing things by ear, and not only looking at the hands. So when I teach online, I like to have both just listening, but sometimes also with a head cam to see how you can get help in with fingerings, and so there's some piano technique involved, of course, too.
Now, I have a question about the rule of the octave. So people, I mean, Fenaroli has that divinative version, as people say, but it's four voices. It's a four voice chord way of doing it. is that going to help you making these florid three voice um, realizations? Of course, it's important to know how to do that, but how would the rule of the octave and these cadences, should you even uh, pursue studying the rule of the octave extensively first, or maybe you could just dive in and use examples, little examples, and build from there?
Yeah, the rule of the octave, you see it used in different ways. Some teachers start with it. Um, Durante waits a little bit with it. He does the cadences first, and he proposes the scales a little bit later on in his teaching. Anyway, all the things that you do in the regula are in a way a preparation for the point where you wipe everything from the table and you're stuck with unfigured bases.
Yeah.
And especially at that point, when you come to the end of the regula and you have done the partimenti numerati, then you need the rule of the octave more than anything else, because then you don't have any figures anymore. And so the rule of the octave was really the tool to do unfigured bass. But it's of course part of the beginner's course, because you really need to know it in all the keys, both in minor and in major. But
So now I have a question about keys. You brought that up. Are these examples to be done? I mean, everyone would just say just do everything in all the keys, yes. But for when you're working with students, it can be overwhelming to do so much. Would you say that you should start with 2, 3 sharps, flats, build up, or would you just say, well, just do it and just get these examples? And another question is positions. Like for instance, these examples here, preparing the fourth. Do you do the 3 positions? What's your perspective on that?
yeah, if you follow the idea, what you see in many of the manuscripts, that there are 2 upper voices over the bass, then it's basically only the flip you have to learn. You flip the soprano and the alto. So that means that you don't have 3 positions, but only the flip.
Mm.
So it makes it a little bit easier. Um, and many of the, if you make variations, then you have one starting point, and you make maybe 3, 4 variations, and then you do the flip, and then you have another 3, 4 variations. So that becomes pretty rich. If you do that with all the cadences and they're all exchangeable, then the teacher can come back the week later and say, okay, you learned this one in E minor, but I'm going to play it in C major. Can you do it? And so you mix everything up as a teacher the week later, because they have to be able to combine it. I mean, the best advice I can give is just look very careful at the editions, because you see it's all there. You can see what they did.
Yeah. One more question I had was this ability to spot key changes, to know exactly where you are. I found that's really crucial, really. I mean, you're lost if you don't know where you are, what key you're in. Do you have some advice for that? That to have that sense of knowledge when there's a modulation. How can a student? How would you teach a student, guide them through looking at a partimento, understanding the roadmap, understanding so you don't get lost and use the wrong
Yeah,
pitches?
right. Yeah, that was the topic of our last talk, right? When we talked about Cotomachi, because Cotomachi really addresses this question in his first book, in the 50 lessons, where he restrains from giving from
Underfigured bases.
exactly, yeah. So he doesn't give any figures, or very little, or he uses figures, but he removes all the accidentals. So you really have to think as a student, what's going on? What is the goal here? Yeah, so I would point in the direction of Cotomaccio for this question.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Can you just relay, I guess to end off, can you talk about your experience as a teacher of Partimento? The community is really growing. You've taught students, and I'm sure people have reached out to you for lessons. You're a very respected teacher. As a teacher, how have you found yourself getting better at teaching this? What have you found really worked? What have you found in your many years of teaching this? What hasn't worked?
Yeah, I think in the first place, I must say that in all cases, I start with Durante. All my students start with Durante because he starts so simple with cadences. So I really think after having seen lots of stuff, I still think it's the best material to start with. Um, After Durante, I usually jump over to Mattei. Why Mattei? Because Mattei's pieces are so short, so you can continue with this memorization process. You can learn, and there's a lot of sequences and a lot of cliches going on. So you learn the contrapuntal cliches by ear, and so you get a database in your head of contrapuntal tricks, and they reappear in the pieces. And after that, I think you have pretty good skills to attack almost anything. After that, I usually go into Leo and Caffaro and Sala and Bologne's maestri or Saratelli.
So another question I had was with regard to the realization of the Partimento. So let's bring this up here. Basso continuo. Should keyboard students have a good understanding of basso continuo accompaniment, just playing chords first before even touching Partimento? Do you think they should have a sense of chords and harmony? Should they play in ensembles? Will that help? Or is Partimento just, you can just dive into Partimento?
Yeah, I think I would just open Durante and say, what does he do with 12-year-old boys? There are no chords. It's just a bass and simple figures, and you start to learn counterpoint. They talked about counterpoint. They didn't talk about harmony. It's counterpoint. So you do counterpoint on the keyboard, and then you do counterpoint on paper. And the goal is to be a contrapuntista. You become a counterpointist, a composer. So the focus is linear lines. They didn't chase parallel fifths as we have been doing in the 19th century and the 20th century. They didn't do that. They played, they had fun, and made counterpoint. It's a counterpoint, practical counterpoint, contrapunto pratico.
Final
Was this?
question.
Yeah.
Final question, which is you mentioned Corelli. I love Vivaldi. He's also just I love him. He's Venetian, right? Does
Yes.
he is he a good source for this, or do the Naples people not really look at Vivaldi, or was he? I mean, he was famous, right?
Yes. I don't know. I haven't seen any Vivaldi in Neapolitan sources, to be honest. Um, so I can't really answer that question.
Hmm. Is he of a
I
different? Would you say is it like a different style?
maybe. I mean, he was also a teacher, but he was a violin teacher, right?
Mm,
So maybe he was more focused on like violin technique and
mm,
bowing technique and that kind of stuff.
yeah,
But it wouldn't surprise me if there was some Partimento teaching going on there too.
yeah, yeah.
It's just we
D-
don't know so much about it.
S- So we should get as many trios as possible, right? We should, as all Partimento students, just grab as many Italian trios and just study and listen and enjoy, as you were saying, and absorb the material?
Yeah, trio sonatas are always good, even the French ones and the German ones.
Give me some specific examples that you think would be great for students to listen to, teachers to use too. Anything, could be anything. It doesn't have to be
Well,
Italian.
I recently bought the Dandrieux trio sonatas. Fabulous pieces, really, really nice.
And
There's
he's the
some,
famous person who did the keyboard harmony.
yeah,
He taught how to use the basso continuo,
yeah.
right? I mean the basso chiffre.
Of course, the trio sonatas by Bach. I mean, which he wrote for Wilhelm Friedemann. The organ works or pedal clavichord trio sonatas. Lovely pieces. I mean, you can learn so much from them.
When is your next? What's your next project, actually, Peter? Do you have a plan? What's the next one?
Mm. Right now, I'm in the middle of a bit of a mess because they closed down this finale.
Oh, you have to switch to Dorico, right?
I have to switch to Dorico, so I'm learning Dorico now.
Do you like it?
Not yet,
It's quite a jump. It's different. It feels
but
totally different.
I actually did my first page of a new edition for the spring, which will be the Cafaro.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
so I hope to do Cafaro next.
Really want to end off with you get a lot of questions about 18th century music, but I know you have experience. Maybe people don't ask you enough about romantic music and later styles. I mean, you know you know a lot about that as well. How can Partimento help you with if you wanted to write more modern styles, and more later styles? Uh, does it work back and forth? I mean, listening to trios from later styles, listening to Partimento, does the Partimento help you be a better composer for more modern styles, or would you just listen to the later stuff and you can start there?
Yeah, there's some French music in the Romantic era, some like Fauré and I mean moderately modern French music. You could absolutely work with Partimento. But if you get to the 20th century, I would rather advise you to take a score of Stravinsky than to take a Partimento collection.
Yeah. There's been a lot of talk about I mean, you're experienced with all sorts of different theories. So how have you managed to synthesize all of that? What's your asking in a general way. Modern theory, there's so many kinds of them. So well, how do you look at music now in a more holistic sense, a general sense? Do you have a particular, like, okay, there's a thread, or I look at different styles, I use different tools. I'm a craftsman. I have a different toolkit for different styles, or do you see like a general, like it all works in one thread, but with some little variations?
Yeah, so I am a historian, so I want to dive into a certain historical period, and I want to use methods that are adequate historically to attack those problems that I see. If I want to learn um, like 18th century counterpoint, I don't want to use Fuchs, um, but rather more practically oriented stuff, and then maybe do Fuchs afterwards. Um, but for modern music, there are so many other things that are much much better to get into it, and
Mm,
that also because it needs to be historically adequate also
mm,
in the 20th century. So you need
yeah.
another toolkit and you need other ideas when you start to compose. What I very much like about Partimento is that it focuses on musicianship in a more broader sense than what is traditionally taught in conservatories, because often instrumentalists, they just play their instrument and they don't bother so much about what the pianist is doing. But if you go through Partimento, you learn really skills that composers learned, and you get that as a musician. Yeah, so you learn to understand what the accompanist is doing and how you can make like varied repetitions and so on, or make cadences. So you become not only a reproductive musician, but also a productive musician. You
Yeah.
learn to compose and improvise. And that becomes so much more, I mean, historically correct, because that's what they did at the time. So we lost a little bit over time of that creative aspect of musicianship, which I think is worth rediscovering.
Mm. Yeah.
That's the main reason why I work with this stuff, to get a more rich view on musicianship.
Yeah. See, even I look at Wagner and I think that's a Partimento guy. I obviously it's not 18th century music, but I see the skeleton. I see the operating system, so to speak, and I see the logic there, and it I can, with adjustments, I can see how someone who is considered romantic like Wagner, it has that sort of similar thinking. Not saying exactly, but something like it.
I mean, he was a master of counterpoint. And you can imagine what did Wagner in his early years to learn all this. I mean, to become so fluent in his lines. Um, of course, we don't know so much about it, but I mean, some traces go back to Partimento there also. So I mean, there are some impulses that he may have gotten from the Mattei school.
Yeah. If you looked at this, right, and there's a correct way to realize it, but let's say you were a person who was mastered this, you're an expert in Partimento, and then you want to go crazy. So, what if I do things in a weird way? And then something creative comes out of that. But at the core, you were originally trained in a way that was kind of this, like a original way. For instance, like modulating in a more unorthodox way that they would have not done. So they would have not done that. But using some of the tools that they used and being a little crazy, being a little creative, I can see how you can expand out of this and not so like people say, oh, this you just do this and you're just going to reproduce the same style and all that. But I can see how if you know your materials well, you can stretch out and extend my hand. I don't know if I'm making sense here.
No, but if you just read the Partimenti by Durante, you see that there are unexpected things.
Yeah.
So even though he's teaching fluency in composition and fluency in playing and fluency in improvisation, you can still see that there is an artistic. I mean, it's still high quality stuff. He does unexpected things, and he shows how to compose. It's
Yeah.
not only reproductive like cliche stuff. There's a lot of interesting composition in these pieces too. So,
Yeah.
but you have to do
Perfect.
it to find it.
Well, so first let's end off by saying that the new edition of Durante's Regole and Partimenti are now available at Westman's. The great Professor Peter Van Toor, I mean, it's such a treasure. You're a treasure to the community, and please keep doing your work and continuing to produce all these wonderful volumes. I can't wait to see what you're going to produce next, and I hope you come on the show again because we always bringing up great new stuff. There's nothing. It's always fresh and always interesting.
You're too kind. Thank you so much for your kind words.